I woke up to an appropriately dark, gloomy, and foggy day. An appropriate morning to mourn the loss of one of America's greatest leaders who graced us with his presence for over a century. Jimmy Carter passed away last night at 100 years old, once and for all disproving the myth that only the good die young. Jimmy was born to some of the most humble beginnings of anybody who would ever become president. On a farm in rural Georgia with no running water or electricity. Their shower head that came off the stock tank was a soup can with some holes poked into it. That's some pretty limited privilege when your plumbing is brought to you by Campbell's. It's unsurprising that he grew up with strong religious convictions, but unlike most Christians, he actually read the Bible and lived by its teachings. As well as dad was a racist pro-segregation asshole, Jimmy took the love thy neighbor shit seriously and befriended black farmhands from a young age. Also, like Jesus in his youth, he developed a love for carpentry, which is a skill he'd go on to use to do more Jesus-y shit later in life. While your megachurch preacher was out there comparing the luxury features between his Gulfstream and his Learjet, Carter was out there at 90 with a hammer and a nail building homes for the homeless. Then Carter decided to serve his country by joining the Navy, and he became a nuclear engineer in the Navy. And when there was a partial reactor meltdown in Chalk River Laboratories in Canada, Carter went there, and he helped lead a team where he himself went inside the reactor to help fix the problem. And just to give you an idea of how much risk they were putting themselves at to fix this problem and protect the community, he had to don full protective gear and get lowered in to turn one screw before being pulled back out, because that was the maximum amount of time a person could spend in there. It was a painstaking process that he saw through and led from the front, a trend he'd keep up through his entire life. Carter met his wife Rosalind in 1946, somebody he'd be married to for 77 years until her death last year. Then Carter gets out of the Navy and he's a nuclear engineer now, right? World is his oyster, and what does he do? He starts a goddamn peanut farm. Humble AF. A peanut farm, his business that he ended up putting in a blind trust when he became president as to not have any conflicts of interest because he had this thing called ethics. Just to think, all of that time he could have been hosting dignitaries at his peanut farm and charging them in Secret Service hundreds of thousands of dollars he could have been pocketing. Good thing we've never had a president who would do something as unethical as that, though. So now he's this humble-ass peanut farmer in Georgia, and he's looking around, and he's like, man, this segregation is some bullshit down here. So he's speaking up about it at church and school board meetings, and it wasn't getting any headway, so he's like, fuck it, and he ran for state senate. He saw injustice and was a man of action. And after becoming a state senator, he used his platform and position to push narratives and policies that helped perpetuate the civil rights movement. He'd go on to become governor, where he continued to make civil rights a top priority, hiring some of the state's first black employees and putting up the portraits of prominent black Georgians in the state house. He was also a fiscally responsible leader, helping to balance Georgia's budget during his time in office. He then ran for president and was rewarded by inheriting all of Nixon's fuck-ups. Rampant stagflation, tensions in the Middle East, tensions with the Soviet Union, and he was a man with the plan. He was the right guy for the job. Guys, this is when we put one foot on the good timeline. We had a foot on it when we elected Carter. He shook up our energy policy to reduce our dependence on foreign oil, not only beefing up U.S. fossil fuel infrastructure, but also putting plans in to transition to more stable and sustainable energy sources like wind and solar, famously putting solar panels on the roof of the White House that Reagan immediately took the fuck off. God, that guy was an asshole. He brought up interest rates, which were the painful but necessary step to get inflation under control. He beautifully handled our relations with the USSR, keeping diplomacy at the front as to not cause any escalations, but he still increased defense spending at a rate which was tolerable and didn't make like space lasers and shit for no apparent reason, but enough to keep pressure on Soviet defense spending that was unsustainable. But on top of that, he took better than just a big stick approach. He made human rights a core platform of U.S. foreign policy, which aside from just being the right thing to do, it put new international pressure from a completely different angle on Russia that they hadn't faced before. Because now, instead of just having to worry about navigating tricky defense policy with the West, they now had to worry about pressure and international sanctions on how they treated people. And that is ultimately what put them on the trajectory for their collapse and won the Cold War, which would have ended years sooner had Reagan not come in with this "I'm not a cowboy, but I play one on TV, and this town ain't big enough for the both of us" act, which spurred the USSR to increase tensions and hold out longer. He made greater strides for peace in the Middle East than any president before or arguably after, with the Camp David Accords bringing peace between Israel and Egypt. He worked tirelessly up to his very last day in office to secure the peaceful release of the hostages in Iran, something that also would have happened months sooner if Reagan hadn't actively sabotaged it to help himself win the election. No joke, Reagan literally made a backdoor deal with Iran to keep the hostages longer to make Carter look bad. The only thing John Hinckley did wrong was miss. Carter was militantly committed to peaceful diplomacy, and it showed, which is why he is probably our only peacetime president. However, Americans don't like that because they've watched too many Sylvester Stallone movies. They're like, he's not blowing enough shit up. So they turned around and elected an actor with Alzheimer's instead. Americans love their actors with Alzheimer's. We want to make them all president, I guess. We just hate competent leadership. So anyway, yeah, we had our foot on the good timeline thanks to Carter, and America's like, nah, fuck that. The worst timeline looks like like way more fun. Let's just go full bore down that road. And then Reagan took credit for everything Carter did because, you know, he was an asshole and just horrible subhuman being. And then he started systematically undoing America, breaking the unions, deregulating environmental and worker protections, shipping jobs to China, secretly funding terrorist organizations. And everybody saw all this trash policy, and through some lead-poisoned haze, they're like, yeah, this is awesome. And they all voted for it again, except for Minnesota, because we are actually awesome. So what did Carter do after being given the shaft for trying to make all of our lives better? He just went on and continued trying to make all of our lives better anyway. He went around negotiating for the release of political prisoners for like decades. Fuck, in 2010, he was negotiating with North Korea about getting an American prisoner released, and North Korea's like, yeah, we'll let him go if you personally come pick him up. And Carter's like, bet, and he jumped on a goddamn airplane and flew to North Korea and personally brought home an American prisoner. And again, this was in 2010. Dude was rounding off 80 years old, still doing presidential shit when he hadn't been president in over 30 fucking years. And that wasn't a one-off incident. He did it a lot. That was just one of the times he had to actually go personally pick up the prisoner. The dude was out overseeing and mentoring fledgling democracies to make sure that they got off the ground. He flew around the world for years helping to negotiate peace in random war zones. The dude eradicated guinea worm and like created a whole task force to fight diseases all around the world that has been wildly successful. All the while, he's still literally building houses with his own two hands for the homeless and supporting Habitat for Humanity. And in between all that, he just finds the time to write like 30 fucking books. He wrote a novel, the first US president to do that. He published a book of poetry. He published books on fishing and camping and shit. It's just like eradicated disease on Monday, release a political prisoner on Tuesday, end a war on Wednesday, build a house for the homeless on Thursday, publish a book teaching kids to fish on Friday, go pick my peanuts on Saturday, and Sunday's still the Lord's Day, where he went to his same little hometown Baptist church that he grew up going to. Humble as fuck. Former US president sitting in some random little one-room rural Georgia church because that's where he grew up. Like, we've had good presidents and bad presidents, but this is the only truly good man to have ever sat in the Oval Office, and we could have had 4 more years of it, and y'all gave us fucking Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan! What is wrong with us? Anyway, Jimmy Carter exemplified what it means to live a life of service. From humble beginnings to a humble end, not only did he grace the face of this planet for over a century, living a life of dedicated service to his family, his community, his state, his country, and the entire world, he did it all quietly, without expectation of praise, reward, money, or power. He did it simply because he could, and because he could, he knew he should. He spent an entire life being a shining beacon of what humanity can be. And after 100 years, he is finally getting some well-earned rest of serving a world that never deserved him but desperately needed him. May he rest in peace, and may his life and legacy be an example of what each and every one of us should strive to be.